Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Galetz, and I'm an industry education coordinator working with Regina District Industry Education Council and Sunwest School Division. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Jason Calvert, who is an aquatics science technician working for Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Yukon Territories. Jason will describe the work he does and how a prairie boy who graduated from Rosetown Central High School came to work in the Yukon for Fisheries and Ocean Canada. So just a reminder before we begin, this session is being recorded and will appear on the RDIEC YouTube channel for you or others to view in the future. We'd like to request that any students who watch this session go to our website at www.rdiec.ca and complete the student survey that can be found near the top of the page. Completion of the survey gets your name in on a monthly draw for a $50 gift card. Again, that website is www.rdiec.ca. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and good day, everyone. I'm going to be talking today about my career as aquatic science technician, working for Fisheries and Oceans Canada out of Whitehorse, Yukon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my job's about, and then describe what a career in conservation sciences or natural resource management might look like, and things to think about those that might be considering a career like this. So just kind of an overall job description. So working for Fisheries and Oceans Canada, I'm a public servant for the federal government. In my job, I support salmon enhancement and conservation initiatives. And more specifically, I'm working towards goals and objectives set out in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, which is an agreement between the US and Canada to operate in management, research, and enhancement of Pacific salmon stocks neutral. What's interesting about my job and where I am here at Whitehorse is that we actually manage stocks of salmon that are in watersheds that we share with the United States. We have a few rivers here that flow, that their headwaters start in Canada and then they flow into Alaska. So as you can imagine, salmon don't know international borders. So in managing those stocks so that we can meet the goals and objectives of both Canadian and US parties is something of concern. So they set up this Pacific Salmon Treaty, and a lot of my work is guided by that in trying to just make sure that enough fish are coming back every year, and that fisheries in both the United States and in Canada are able to take sustainable harvest from these fisheries and ensure that stocks aren't depleted. So that's one of the unique things about being here in Whitehorse is a lot of our work is actually working with the United States to manage these populations. I'm working with Pacific salmon stocks, so these are salmon that they spawn in fresh water, and then they head out to the ocean where they grow and mature, and they return to fresh water again to spawn and die, and that's their life cycle. So I'm working with a few different species of salmon: Chinook, sockeye, coho, pink, and chum are the 5 species of Pacific salmon that I work with. So working with these populations of Pacific salmon, I assist in the design and implementation and review of studies, assessments, and salmon culture programs to enhance salmonid populations and habitats. So that's kind of an overarching description of what my job is. A lot of these studies and assessments are focusing on ways that we can actually enhance or bolster these populations of salmon. So we're looking at ways to enhance habitats, or often just to enhance the number of salmon that are in the rivers. So that we can do that a few different ways, but salmon culture, or actually taking eggs and fertilizing those eggs and then incubating them in a controlled environment, is one of the best ways that we can actually enhance some of these salmon populations and increase the number of salmon that are available in that system. So in my job, I work collaboratively with colleagues within my department, but also stakeholders, other government agencies, commercial and domestic fishers, First Nations, and private consultants. So I'm working with quite a range of groups and people in my day-to-day activities. But to get a little more into the specifics of what my job is, I'll talk just briefly about some of my field-based job duties. One of my primary duties, as I've discussed already, is this idea of enhancing salmon populations. So these salmon culture programs is actually where we take the mature fish when they return to spawn, and salmon die when they spawn, or Pacific salmon are semiparous, meaning that after they spawn, they die. So we take those fish, we kill them mainly, and then we remove the eggs from the females and the milt from the males, and we fertilize those eggs. We fly them to a hatchery located in Alaska. We incubate those eggs over the winter months, and then they hatch out late winter, and we incubate them for a few more weeks and then return them back to the lake from where they came. And by taking those eggs from the female and incubating them in a controlled, safe environment like a hatchery, we're able to boost the survival from anywhere from, you might see like 10% of an egg to fry survival. So from an egg that you see on the left here to a small fish that you see on the right, you might get 10-20% in the wild at most. And then we can boost those numbers up to more like anywhere from 60 to 80% survival. So that's one of the best ways that we can actually enhance or increase the number of salmon. And that's one of my primary job duties, focusing around these fish culture programs. So in the photo on the left, that's a female fish, and they're stripping the eggs out of that fish. They'll be fertilized. And the photo on the center, those are what we call eyed eggs. So they're at the point where they're hatching into pulvins, which are newly hatched juvenile salmon. Photo on the right, you see what's called a juvenile or a par salmon. So that fish is matured to a size where it's able to feed and actively and head out to the ocean once it gets a little bit larger. So one of my primary field-based job duties is actually tracking fish movements. In 2019, I was part of a study where we tagged a number of fish with radio tags, and we actually inserted these tags. In the photo on the right, you can see that there's a tag there ready to be inserted into this adult sockeye salmon. We insert those through the esophagus into the stomach, and that wasn't too intrusive for the fish because they're not actually feeding when they're on their migration journeys. They stop feeding altogether when they start migrating upriver and preparing to spawn. So we'd insert these tags into the fish and then track their movements using a radio antenna that I'm holding here in the photo on the left. And we'd also attach that antenna to a helicopter and fly the river and search for fish and track their movements. So that was something that I was very involved with in 2019. One of the primary job duties of any kind of fisheries technician or fisheries biologist is collecting biological data. So that's often what they call age, sex, length data, taking measurements of the fish, and what we call aging structures, which are bony structures like scales or ear bones that can be used to actually determine the age of the fish. And then sometimes collecting tissue samples or DNA samples that can be sent to a lab for contaminant analysis or DNA analysis. So in the photo on the far left top, taking a measurement of an adult salmon, just getting a length measurement there. In the center photo, using tweezers to pluck a scale, and those scales can be used to actually age that fish. similar as you can age a tree by looking at the growth rings on a tree cookie. You can actually look at a fish scale and tell how many years old it is. And the photo on the far right, just taking a snip of the one of the axillary appendages on the pectoral fin, or pelvic fin, sorry, for DNA analysis. And then bottom left photo, just measuring a small juvenile salmon. And then the photo bottom right, sometimes we actually get right into the water and do these snorkel surveys to physically count how many fish that we encounter in some of these smaller river systems where there's clear water, and we can actually count how many fish that we see. So a whole bunch of different population assessment and sampling methods, but just to kind of give you a snapshot of that aspect of the job. Another one of my field-based job duties is restoring or enhancing fish habitats. One of the primary focuses of my job over the last several years has been removing a fish salmon migration barrier. A large rock slide occurred in 2014 that blocked salmon passage. The fish were having a really hard time getting over this massive waterfall. You can see in the photo on the far left. And then the photo in the center is kind of zooming in on a fish, a large Chinook jumping at the base of it, so you can tell just how big it is. So we assessed and evaluated that passage barrier and determined that we needed to do something about it, just to ensure that these fish could reliably and consistently make it to their spawning grounds. We actually went in with a crew of rock blasters, and they set off dynamite, a photo on the far right, and blew a lot of rock material out of there and turned it into something that the river could kind of carve out again. And I'm happy to say that fish are making it past that migration barrier consistently, and the issue's been resolved. So a few other field-based job duties: classifying aquatic habitats and carrying out stream quality monitoring. So just assessing aquatic habitats, taking measurements of oxygen, temperature, stream discharge. There's a lot of different parameters that we monitor. Maintaining camp facilities and coordinating camp operations. So establishing camps, maintaining them, has been a big part of my job. And then occasionally supervising other field staff and contractors while they're working. So based on the photos that you'll see in this presentation, you might assume that I spend almost all my time outside. But the reality is that about 80% of my time is I'm going to say 70 to 90% of my time on any given year spent in the office, doing a number of office-based tasks. Those include monitoring expenses to manage project budgets, developing project proposals, utilizing computer software applications to analyze and present scientific information, preparing technical reports and communicating findings from studies and research that we've done, and planning the logistical and technical components of scientific projects. So, I don't have any photos of me hunkered down in front of my desk, but I pulled one off the internet just to make sure that people are aware that, with almost any job in this field, especially, permanent year-round work, you're going to be spending quite a bit of time in the office, because every time you go out into the field and collect data or information, you have to come back and do something with it, analyze it, prepare a report, prepare presentations to share that information and report out on what you've done, and then plan and submit proposals to try to secure funding for new projects. It's a big part of my job as well, is the office space. Talk a little bit about job suitability and a few skills and traits that I feel might kind of lend themselves towards a career in in conservation sciences or natural resources management. So I listed a few skills here, and those include problem solving. Effective communication skills is definitely a big one. Working effectively as part of a team. I'm often working with, with others, and sometimes, like I said, First Nations, consultants, other government organizations. So being able to communicate and work effectively with others is definitely an asset. Being organized, there's a lot of different pieces, and there's a lot of kind of moving parts to some of these projects. So staying organized and on top of things is definitely part of it. Being able to work under pressure, sometimes tight timelines, sometimes there's, working with pretty large budgets, and so under pressure is definitely part of the job, and effective time management as well. So a few traits, just being adaptable, motivated, thoughtful, inventive, curious, and adventurous. These are all traits that might lend themselves to this type of career, in my opinion. So individuals that I feel might be best suited to this position, people that have a strong interest in biology, conservation, or scientific studies. If you enjoy spending time outdoors and have a strong interest in activities such as hiking, canoeing, observing wildlife, things of that nature. As I mentioned, a lot of it is office-based, so if you have strong written and oral communication skills, or strong analytical or technical skills, then those are also a big asset. And just because you're not necessarily, really outdoorsy, that doesn't mean that you might not fit into a career in conservation sciences. More and more, it's moving towards, things just like a lot of jobs. More and more, it's office-based. Things are done on the computer more than they were in the past. So definitely a big part of the job as well. And then able to work long hours and participate in periods of strenuous physical work. Certainly during the field season, the spring, summer, and fall, you can expect to work some really long days and have some fairly physical work at times. Talk a little bit about the job setting and location. So the main office is located in Whitehorse, Yukon. A lot of my field-based operations take place over a huge geographic region that includes the Yukon and northern BC. But I've kind of highlighted in this red circle in the photo on the bottom of the screen, you can see that I'm actually working a lot in remote regions of northwestern British Columbia, mainly on the Stikine and the Taku River system. It's quite a commute from Whitehorse to get to a lot of these places, and there is quite a bit of travel associated with the job. In addition to some of our field operations and projects that we have going on in the Yukon and northern British Columbia, I travel to meetings, occasionally in Vancouver and Seattle, to meet with, they'll get together to meet with some of our counterparts with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And we'll do that a few times a year, and get together as a group, usually, and alternating between meeting in Canada and meeting in the United States. So some of the equipment that I work with, I'm not going to get into too much detail about the equipment because there's just so many different pieces of equipment that we use. But as part of my job, I am required to purchase, maintain, calibrate, and operate a huge range of field equipment that's used in the assessment of salmon habitats and the collection of biological data, and the monitoring and inventory of fish populations as well. So just a few things on the top here. Got a water level logger on the left, and then on the right, just a temperature logger. So these monitor water levels and water temperatures over time, something that you can leave in place in a river and come back at a later date and download a whole bunch of data. On the bottom left is a radio telemetry tower with the receiver in the top of that photo. So those are used to monitor fish movements. In the center on the bottom is one of those radio tags that I talked about earlier that we were using to monitor fish movements, about the size of a AA battery. Then on the right, I'm constructing a fish holding pen for an egg take. A lot of our work is just figuring out different ways to capture fish, to hold fish, and constructing different net pens or nets to do so. So also as equipment, some of our transportation gear, so we're using a wide variety of different vehicles, including trucks, boats, small aircraft, and helicopters to get around. Like I mentioned, a lot of my work is quite remote, so relying on these smaller float planes or helicopters to get around is definitely a big part of the job. I'll talk a little bit about some of the rewards of my occupation, or really any occupation in conservation sciences or biology or natural resource management, and definitely a diverse and interesting field. So there's so many different opportunities and locations and species that you could potentially study, and even within my job working with salmon, the diversity of projects that I've been involved with and the different places that I've been able to see in just the past 5 years is really astounding, and something I'm very grateful for sure. You get to travel to remote and beautiful wilderness settings, so you get to go to these wild places and share the rivers with grizzly bears and have phenomenal fishing and just beautiful scenery, and you can't really put a price on that. It's pretty great benefit of the job for sure. So like I said, spending time outdoors, if you enjoy that's definitely a reward of this type of occupation. It's a good mix of office and more active field work. As I mentioned, mostly office work in the winter time and a lot more field work and outdoor work in the summer, but you do get that mix. You might not get that with a lot of jobs. Certainly within my job, and I think within this field, there's opportunities to grow, to learn new skills, to obtain new certifications, and to further your education. And it's just a rewarding feeling contributing towards the conservation of species or natural resources. You feel like you're helping make the world a better place, I guess, and conserve the environment and protect it for future generations. So a few challenges of the occupation. Sometimes you feel like this little tiny fish on the photo on the right here, like you're just a small salmon trying to swim upstream, and the competition for positions in this field can be really intense. So certainly coming out of school, trying to apply on some of these more permanent or higher paying jobs, and there can be a lot of competition for them. So that's definitely one of the challenges, is it's not something where you're guaranteed a full-time position right out of school. You might have to be prepared to move around, to network, to kind of work hard to get into a full-time permanent position that you're looking for. There's a high prevalence of work, but it is a lot of short-term seasonal work. So you might end up having to work seasonally for a little while just to kind of get your foot in the door and get some work experience, because these full-time permanent positions that are year-round can be a little bit harder to come by. There can be a lot of travel. Certainly with my job, there's a fair amount of travel and nights away from home, and that can place a strain on your personal life. So that's something to keep in mind. Long hours, as I talked about, you'll be expected in most jobs to work weekends occasionally and overtime regularly in the summer field season. Often work outdoors in harsh conditions, so it can be tough working outside all the time. There's long winters of primarily office-based work, so the office work can get tedious. In the winter, it can be a lot of computer work and office-based activities. The work can be remote, logistically challenging, and come with increased safety concerns. So as I said, you're often working out there a long way from any kind of amenities or hospital. You could be a couple days from a hospital. And with that comes, increased logistical challenges and safety concerns for sure. And lastly, it can feel like you're fighting a losing battle. Sometimes, there's a lot of bad news as far as environmental degradation, habitat loss, species extinctions, and depending on what you're doing or what species you happen to be working with, it can feel like losing the battle or it's worse. So that can take a toll for sure. Talk some about life-work balance. So overnight travel and overtime related to field work and meetings can place stress on family life here, especially during the field season. So you can expect to be away a lot. Sometimes I'm away for a couple weeks at a time, and I have coworkers that can be away for as much as a month and a half at a time. So it can be a long time to be away from home. But on the flip side, holidays and bank time allow for extended periods of time off work for leisure, travel, or time with family. So I get quite a bit of holiday time, and we get to bank a lot of our overtime, which you can take off at a later date, off winter when it's not as busy. And so those can provide opportunity for time with family. And some of the attractive benefits, medical, dental, and leave provisions take financial strain away and also allow opportunities to spend time with families. For example, I have a little daughter. She just turned 7 months old. And so I'm on some parental leave right now, and actually 8 months of parental leave. So a pretty substantial chunk of time that I'm allowed to take off. So those kinds of benefits, that's more specific to my job with the federal government. You'd find that with government positions. Certainly those kinds of benefit packages can really help with that balance aspect. Salary and benefits. So annual gross salary range for my particular position is $50,000 to $73,000 a year. That's just to my job, but you find that a similar range for a lot of technician positions throughout Canada. Benefits, medical benefits, about 80% coverage, same with dental coverage. So it's pretty good coverage for medical and dental. Pension, we have one of the best pension plans in North America. The public service pension plan is a really big benefit of this job. And it's really an attractive part of working for the federal government for sure, having that pension there. Holidays, I get about 3 weeks paid holiday annually, but on top of that, I get all federal staff off. Plus, as I mentioned, I can use my banked overtime to take time off later on in the season. And typical work hours are 37.5 hours a week, about 7.5 hours a day. But as I said, often in the field season, working weekends and overtime. So educational requirements, the basic kind of minimum requirements for my particular position are successful completion of a secondary school diploma, but preference is given to those that have a degree or diploma from a recognized post-secondary institution with relevant specializations. Specialization in biology, aquatic sciences, natural resources management, or environmental sciences, just to name a few examples. So a few additional conditions of employment I just thought I'd mention in addition to those education requirements. For my particular job with the federal government, there's a security clearance, which is basically Health Canada medical clearance, required to have a Class 5 driver's or equivalent, valid first aid certification, Canada Coast Guard craft operators or driving boats, and a valid firearms possession acquisition license. There are exceptions, obviously, you know, those are things that you might be able to work towards after you're in a position, but those are generally speaking conditions of employment. So a few certifications and extra training that are part of my job: swiftwater rescue training, Fisheries and Oceans Canada small vessel training, wilderness first aid certification, air safety training, annual firearms training and evaluations, and aviation egress training. So these are all certifications that I have to maintain and recertify as necessary on an ongoing basis for my job. So I'll talk a little bit about what led me to this career, and it was just from a young age that I had a really keen interest in the outdoors and the natural world, and fishing and hunting and hiking and canoeing and just spending time outside. So that's kind of what led me towards this career path. My personal education, so high school diploma, I graduated from Rosetown Central High School in 2005, and I can actually still remember sitting down in grade 12 with Mr. Gilletz and kind of going over the options for what to do after high school, and one of the things that we did land on was this wildlife and fisheries conservation. So we talked about Lakeland College, and that's where I ended up going after high school, was wildlife and fisheries conservation major at Lakeland College in Vermilion, Alberta. And I graduated from that program in 2007. And the following fall, I started a Bachelor of Science in Environmental and Conservation Sciences with a conservation biology major at the University of Alberta. I graduated from that in 2009. So I ended up with both a diploma and a degree, and I did that over a span of 4 years. I'll talk a little bit about my experience with Lakeland College. That was definitely a really, really great experience, very hands-on learning, lots of field trips. I'd say I kind of established a lot of the foundation for a lot of the skills that I gained in my post-secondary, a solid foundation at Lakeland College, and did a lot of networking there. And it really led to open a lot of doors for me. And I'd say it's one of the primary reasons that I got a lot of my positions early on, was just having that practical, hands-on, applied experience that I gained through that diploma at Lakeland College. You can tell from the photos that it was a lot of interesting field trip, hands-on learning. University of Alberta, because I started at the U of A after I'd already done a couple of years of college, I wasn't as involved in the field. Some of the field trips and some of those skills, but this is where I gained a lot of more my analytical experience and some of the more science-based programs. So I was also involved in a volunteer effort to trap deer and track their movements using radio collars. So that's a photo that you see there is the urban deer project that I was involved with at the University of Alberta. So yeah, there I gained my bachelor's in environmental and conservation sciences, and it worked out well for me going to college and university, gaining that practical hands-on experience at college, and then getting that direct 2 years transfer, equivalent 2 years University of Alberta, and then finishing up my BSc there, and getting that degree definitely opened up some doors as well. So I'd say that that combination of the college and university education worked well for me. So I've talked a lot about my current position, but I thought I'd mention some of my previous work experience as well. I held a lot of summer jobs while I was going to school, and a few jobs after graduating from university as well. So I'll just touch on each of those really quickly. So one of my first field jobs as I was going to college was working for Ducks Unlimited, doing doing waterfowl research. So we were actually searching for duck nests and then monitoring those nests and seeing what kind of relationship there was between nesting success of prairie waterfowl and the type of vegetation that they were utilizing and what habitats they were utilizing. So that was a really, really good experience and my first field job that I had that really opened up a lot of doors for me. So in 2008, I worked for a company called Mainstream Aquatics, and that's where I started to gain a lot of my fisheries skills and a lot of that first introduction to fisheries work was with them doing electrofishing and fisheries surveys on rivers in northern British Columbia. Worked as a fishing guide for a couple summers on a fishing lodge in northern Saskatchewan. The name of the business is Lakers Unlimited. We're targeting mostly trophy lake trout and northern pike as well. So that was not as necessarily related to my education, but really, really great experience and a really cool job. And as far as, you know, being out in the outdoors and boat operating skills and camp management and running a camp and that kind of thing, it was some valuable experience for sure. So after graduating from university, I got a job working at the Cold Lake Fish Hatchery as a fisheries technician, and I held that job from October of 2010 till May of 2014. So this was incubating trout eggs, rearing those fish, and then walking them into lakes throughout the province of Alberta. That was kind of what a lot of my job was about. I also did some public education and engagement, and it was sort of my first permanent full-time work after graduating from university. And then also with Alberta Fish Culture, I worked as a stock assessment biologist from June 2014 to about March 2016. And this involved more research-based activities. We were getting out and conducting some studies on some of the water bodies that we stock and doing some really neat fish in that stock assessment biologist position. In 2016, my wife and I moved up to Whitehorse for an opportunity that she had with the Yukon government. And so I was looking for work, and I found a job with a company called Metla Environmental Incorporated, and they do they're a private consultant that do a lot of salmon work in this part of the world. And I actually work with Metla quite a bit to coordinate a lot of our projects that we have moving on with DFO. This is where I really got a foot in the door with fisheries and oceans and gained a lot of valuable experience working with salmon. Was the couple months that I spent working with Metla in the fall of 2016. Some massive Chinook salmon on one of the rivers that we were working on there. So I'll talk a little bit about opportunities in the field. The job market is growing, I'd say, but it is dependent on economic climate and political leadership. So job availability it can fluctuate a bit just depending on what the economy is doing, what political party happens to be in power. Things can change quite a bit. So it is definitely one of the challenges is just kind of a variable job market, but with growing concerns surrounding the environment and species at risk and climate change and things of that nature, there is definitely a growing opportunity for these types of positions. Chances for advancement, if you're willing to work hard, there's definitely chances for advancement within my career or within any career within this field. You definitely have to work for it. You know, like I said, there's more competition than you might see for some positions. There's definitely opportunities there. So typically technical positions like mine will often lead to more senior or biologist type positions. So that's kind of the general path that you might see as will often start, students might start in a junior technician or junior biologist type role, and then moving up to a senior technician or intermediate biologist, and then end up as a biologist or senior biologist eventually. Of what it looks like for a lot of people. So talking a bit more about opportunities, there's 4 main sectors in this field, and those are nonprofit organizations, academia like universities, government organizations, and private industry. So those are the main 4 sectors where you're going to see people hiring these types of positions. There's a wide range of related disciplines and occupations. It really is a huge field. And, you know, I started out, you know, with not knowing whether I wanted to be studying fish or wildlife or more involved in habitat, but there, you know, I ended up working with fish and being involved in fisheries. But there really is a lot of different options out there and different paths that you can take. I listed off just a few examples of different jobs within this field. So in closing, a few things to keep in mind if you're seriously considering a career in conservation. And those are being prepared to work hard. Like I said, there's a bit more competition and lots of jobs out there, but just be prepared to work. Don't just do it for the money. You know, you're not probably going to get rich. You can certainly earn a good living doing this type of work, but not just doing it for the money. You know, sure you want to be kind of passionate about the work that you're doing, and that's something to keep in mind too. Volunteering, there's lots of volunteer opportunities out there, and that's something that I would definitely suggest. I did some volunteering when I was in college and university and at a school, just to try to gain that experience and expand my experience, and that can lead to a lot of employment opportunities, volunteering and getting yourself out there and gaining those skills. Being prepared to move around, as long as you're willing to move and travel. There's so many jobs out there in this field, but you might not necessarily find one in your hometown or within your backyard. So you've got to be prepared to move and travel and at least until you get some experience, would be a suggestion. And I know that I've moved around. I've lived a lot of different places since I graduated from university. Networking, so making those connections and contacts. Any opportunity you get, just trying to network and meet people is a great way to seek employment in this field. It's a pretty small world, in this field. Once you've been in it for a while, you realize that everybody kind of knows everybody, at least within the fisheries world. Or it's definitely a small world. That network can really help. And lastly, getting qualified. So just getting the education that you need for a job in conservation sciences, whatever field or stream or major that you're interested in. Get the qualifications and get the skills and that you need, so you can get out there and get the experience in the job that you're after. Yeah, that's my presentation. Do my best to answer any questions that you guys might have.
It's really good, Jason. I'm really glad you mentioned that you got the education in 2 programs, or at Lakeland and then over at U of A. I don't know if a lot of high school students sometimes look at that option, or you can go to that more, often, not always, but often can go to a hands-on, a lot of activity-based, field-based learning at college, and then can bridge over to a related degree program. And in your field that's possible, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's often overlooked by students.
Yeah, like I said, it worked out well for me, and I found that coming from a small town and going to another smaller town like Vermilion, and smaller class sizes, and more one-on-one time with professors. And yeah, it was just a really great great way to learn, and kind of a great way to bridge into that university experience.
Yeah, because U of A is a big place, and coming from small town Saskatchewan, that's sometimes a big step to take. So you were probably more prepared for it, you felt, by the time you got to university?
For sure. Yeah.
Good. Sure, if there's anybody else.
Where do you see your career going from now, Jason? Do you see yourself living up there for a while, or are there other opportunities that you're maybe considering in the near future, or a few years down the road?
Yeah, I see us. We love it here in Whitehorse. It's a pretty cool place to be. It's definitely quite a ways from some of our family in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but we see ourselves staying here. We've got a house here now, and we're kind of putting down some roots. So it's yeah, it's been a great career, and definitely love our jobs and love Whitehorse. And yeah, there's just a lot of opportunity up here. And it's one thing I didn't really talk about or focus too much on is, just a career in the north. There's a lot of advantages to working in the north or seeking employment in the north. One of them is honestly just less competition for jobs. So there's just way less competition for some of these positions in some of these northern and more remote communities. There's also some perks. There's some tax breaks. There's northern living allowance. A bit of extra money to offset some of the increased costs of living and working in the north. So yeah, we love it up here, and we love the wilderness and the opportunities, and working out great so far.
Yeah, you confirmed what I've always heard from people that have ever moved up north is once you're there, you stay there. It really is a lifestyle a lot of people desire, and they definitely get that when they make that commitment to moving up north. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Fascinating presentation, Jason. Could you tell me, how does this, Jeff Cameron here, how does the incubation process work?
For the salmon eggs?
Yes.
So the eggs are removed from the fish and they're fertilized, and then those the fertilized eggs are shipped to a hatchery, and those eggs are kept in water at a stable temperature, either water or high humidity at a stable temperature. And we call it incubating. Often we're keeping these eggs at a temperature somewhere between 6 and about 12 degrees Celsius, which is typical to what you might see in a natural environment. A lot of these eggs are incubating at temperatures typically between 3 and 6 degrees in the wild throughout the winter. So pretty cold water temperatures.
Yes.
So keeping those eggs at a stable temperature, and then when they hatch out, just putting them into suitable troughs or containers, and then feeding them if necessary until they reach a size where you are able to release them back.
Okay. Do the males die also?
Yes. Yeah. Both the males and females die following spawning.
And I just have one last question. Are you guys in need of a hunting guide to protect your tents? A guy that would like to visit with people and carry a rifle just from bears and stuff? Because if you are, I might say goodbye to the RDIEC team here and just come and join you there.
Oh, I figured we'd lose Jeff here.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any positions available right now, but that is something that as part of my training is we do the shotgun training, and we have to maintain that certification just for bear protection. And we don't have a whole lot of issues with bears. We work side by side with the bears on a lot of these rivers. They know the rules, and we know the rules, and we mutual respect and everything. But we do have to carry a shotgun for a lot of our work, and it's hopefully a concern.
Just fascinating. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Jason, this is Gord Heidel. I just want to thank you for the work that you do. A lot of people don't realize all the work that goes on in the background. With the salmon stocks, I know there was some real concern a few years back around the salmon stocks. Is it getting better? What's your
Well, it's so variable, you know, one river to another and one species to another too. So it varies a lot from watershed to watershed and species to species. And overall, it's not great. You know, a lot of populations are in decline, you know, certainly across the Pacific. Salmon populations and no different throughout other parts of the world. But yeah, it's kind of a combination of different factors: overfishing, climate change, warmer ocean conditions, and their habitat loss, water quality degradation. All these things kind of play a part. But in my part of the world, it's you know, things have been a little less impacted, you might say. Certainly by warmer water temperatures, we're a little less impacted than some of the rivers down south. Things are variable. I mean, sockeye salmon runs are pretty strong for the most part. Pink and chum generally have been pretty good. Chinook salmon have been a species of main concern for many years. Here on the Yukon River, their numbers have been declined, and there's been really low runs now for the past couple decades. Really, the numbers have been declined, and that's true a lot across a lot of our rivers. So these big Chinook, like the one that I'm holding in the photo, there just seems to be fewer and fewer of them. But it varies year to year. You know, a lot of what we do here in Whitehorse, and it's not as much a part of my job, is just trying to estimate how many fish are going to come back each year. And a lot of that's by figuring out how many fish came back 5 years ago, because those fish spawned, and it's their offspring that are going to be coming back 5 years later. So there's a whole cycle to kind of managing the harvest of these fish and predicting how many are going to come back and trying to ensure that harvest remains sustainable, so that the, you know, substantial or suitable numbers of fish are making back to these rivers to spawn each year and in their numbers. So, you know, without going into too much specifics about it, that's kind of, you know, overall, you know, there's a lot of bad news out there, but here in the Yukon and Alaska and northern BC, you know, there's still a lot of strong salmon runs and a lot of sustainable harvest for, you know, from the chum and the coho and the sockeye.
Thank you very much for the work you're doing. It's more important than people realize, and it's you know, you're essentially making sure that the habitats are safe and conducive, so you're preventing, you know, devastation that could happen later on. So thank you. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thanks so much, Jason. It's to me quite a success story how a prairie boy from a grain farm in Rosetown, Saskatchewan, and West Central Saskatchewan is now with Fisheries and Oceans Canada and helping make sure that we have salmon in our future. And thanks again for all the work you do. And I really appreciate your story, and I appreciate you doing this. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share my career path and just try to shed a little light on the career options for students that might be in our work.